Okay, so this can be thought of as part two of my video, A Brief History of the North Korean Won. So I basically covered up until 2009 when they switched to the third won. In this video, I'm going to talk more about what happened after they switched. So one thing we have to understand is inflation. I'm sure most of you know what inflation is. As a quick recap, inflation is when over time you have to pay more money or spend more money to get the same amount of goods. So it can be thought of as a loss in the purchase power of your money. Most countries experience inflation to some degree. This is why the general trend is that the denomination on bills gets bigger over time, the US being an exception. Most countries have inflation now. It's generally seen by economists as being good for the economy, although there are those that challenge this view. The only really major economy that has the opposite of inflation, called deflation nowadays, is Japan. We'll also have to talk about hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is when the monthly inflation rate is over 50%. This is bad for economies. This is bad because it's very it's pretty much impossible to preserve wealth at this point if you're holding it in the nation's currency. So this is a case where, buying something at the beginning of the month versus the end of the month, it's going to go up at least 50% in price if you buy this basket of goods. It can be much higher. The record is Hungary after World War II, which was some massive magnitude. Another famous recent example would be Zimbabwe, or even more recently, Venezuela. Inflation is best thought of as a crisis in confidence. It's not completely the economic problem that is creating hyperinflation. It's the economic problem then creating a crisis in confidence where people lose confidence in the national currency. So, for a quick recap of my last video, North Korea stopped using the first won in 1959. They issued the second won, so you traded in 100 of the old won, you got one of the second won, and the reason for this is that the country was already having inflation problems. After the Korean War, much of North Korea was damaged. It damaged the economy. People were nervous, and they started to have inflation. And then, in December of 2009, North Korea moved on to the third won. At this point, there was lots of inflation. In the 90s, there had been famines, and this produced a robust black market. The UN estimates that perhaps 50% of the caloric intake of North Korean citizens, normal North Korean citizens, came from food from the black market. So there was a large black market. There was lots of food being traded on it. There was currency exchange going on too, of course, on the black market. And so they decided to get rid of the second won, but they didn't do a very good job. In fact, the North Korean government dropped the ball. So what happened is November 30th, 2009, they said that the second won was no longer legal tender, meaning that you can't use it for transactions. So now businesses have to close. and there won't be a new currency until December 7th. So people panic. People begin to panic, so they move on to the black market. People that have, I guess you could say, harder currencies like the US dollar, the Chinese RMB, the Japanese yen, the euro. People want these currencies because now they're seen as safer. So there's a big drive to trade the North Korean won for these safer currencies on the black market. Now, part of the idea of this change of the third won was actually to, lower inflation. So they traded 100 old won, the second won, for one third won. They also put caps on how much currency you could trade. So this acted as a wealth tax and was also supposed to curb the black market. But it failed. Basically, this blotched rollout of the third won ends up leading to hyperinflation. It's the spark that starts the fire, so to say. So, according to Stephen H. Hanke, it started in December of 2009, and it went to January of 2011. So during this time, he found that the worst month, or worst time, was the beginning of March in 2010, when the monthly inflation rate would be measured at 926%, or 8.07% a day, or because I've read actually a bit of his work about hyperinflation, the metric he uses that I really like is the time required for prices to double, which was 9.1 days. The work of Chung Yeon-wook, I hope I pronounced his name right. He works for NH Investment and Securities. He found that the inflation rate for 2011 on a yearly basis would be 229%. Now, you might be asking, how do we get a number for inflation in North Korea where officially it's at a pegged rate to the US dollar? So, once again, the black markets are important. So, the black markets have a exchange market. You can go to these black markets and you can trade North Korean won for different currencies: the US dollar, the Chinese yen, the euro, the Japanese yen. So you're able to trade these currencies daily. North Korea, they do really great work and have lots of information about North Korea. They actually keep tabs and occasionally post market rates, which allows economists to then look at the rates, because it also includes things like rice and gas and pork. So particularly Hanke, he talks about looking at the exchange to the US dollar and how much people are spending on rice. And that gives you an idea of what's happening with the inflation rates. And that's how you're able to get an inflation rate. Now, one of the things that happens during hyperinflation is that oftentimes people try to move to what they see as a safer currency. A lot of times it is called dollarization because the dollar is very popular for this. In North Korea, it looks like they tried to move to the dollar, so dollarization, yuan, so yuanification, I guess. The euro and yen is also popular, so I guess euronization and yenification. I don't know, I'm making this up at this point. There's also a very interesting story. So at Kaesen Industrial Complex, this is a joint venture. So the owning company is South Korean. The manufacturing is in North Korea with North Korean workers. they are not allowed to give cash bonuses. So they would give bonuses in Choco Pies, and the Choco Pies became an unofficial currency in the area that you could actually had a trading rate on the market. I mean, just like prisons using cigarettes or gum or favors. The Choco Pies were seen as a more reliable form of putting your wealth into than the national currency. December 17th, 2011. Kim Jong Un has come to power in North Korea after his father's death. Kim Jong Un is now the big man, the head honcho, El Jefe, the big cheese. North Korea is no longer experiencing hyperinflation. However, the currency has still not stabilized. 2012 saw the currency continue to weaken against the US dollar. Rice prices also continued to rise until the end of 2012. Kim Jong-un announces a series of economic reforms. So he changes away from his father's system. This first new economic measure was announced in June 28th, 2012. It basically gave more discretion to the production units, to industries, to agriculture, to farms. It gave them more discretion. This continued again with another one announced in August 15th, 2013, where the new model of socialist corporate responsibility management systems was announced. What this basically was a system where the units of production, the factories, the farms, would have more control over what they did and what happened. This increased autonomy was also coupled in agriculture with reform of the collectivist farms, where fewer people would work on a farm and they changed the structure of the collectivist farms. And then on May 30th of 2014, more of these reforms were announced, giving even more autonomy. And this was coupled with a policy of ignoring the black market, allowing the black market to flourish and operate, alongside allowing more autonomy to the business units, and also people being in a private market, opening shops, selling things. So this, along with the increased use of foreign currency inside North Korea, it was basically tolerated. And you can see when you look at these charts that what happened in 2013 is that this currency stabilized. It stayed somewhere around 8,000 won to $1 US. Chung Yeon-wook points out that the inflation remains near 5% from about 2015 onwards. So the economy recovered. Rice prices, where rice will always be a little more volatile because it's seasonal, but it was no longer as volatile. And also, you have to remember, some of the volatility you see in this chart is also from the change in the value of the currency. So when the currency, moves up and down, that affects the price of rice too. I think that Kim Jong-un and North Korea were in better shape and are in better shape until recently. Coronavirus has kind of switched things up, and that will be the subject of my next video. was in better shape than many people believe. I know that a lot of people feel that North Korea and Kim Jong Un came to the table and, negotiated with Moon, negotiated with Trump because their economy was in a bad position. But the data seems to suggest that North Korea was not in as bad a position as many people pretend. And I think that to a large extent, Un came to the table not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The country had increased food production. They've had no problem buying food from China. If your people are fed, they're less likely to revolt and riot and stuff. And also the regime has a very tight control on everything. This is not an unstable regime by any appearance. So I think that he came to the table maybe with more cards than most people think, but I think because he wanted to. He saw some benefit in coming to the table and negotiating with Trump, even though just a few months earlier they were insulting each other over Twitter. I mean, that's how the world works, right? So I think Un did a very good job, and that's also why I think that we might actually be hoping that Un's not dead, at least the United States and Trump, because they've been able to negotiate, they've been able to reach grounds before, and the country has been stable under Un's control. So I think that actually Un dying would be a concern for the United States, and particularly the Trump administration of, what if whoever takes power is not as amicable, is not as interested in negotiating. So I don't know. I don't know what will happen. I'm actually going on a podcast later this week, and I have a feeling North Korea will come up, and we'll talk about it. Anyways, my next video about North Korea is going to be talking about the coronavirus and how that is affecting inflation rates, currency, trade, all that fun stuff.